Well, hello there. It is great to see you, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Retirement Playbook with Bryon Spicer. I am your host and moderator, Ryan Ruff, and in just a few moments, I'll be bringing really the star of our show in Mr. Bryon Spicer, the founder and CEO of Spicer Wealth Management, onto the show. Because, hey, each episode we've got Bryon to sit down with us, and we're going to really be unpacking the same types of conversations, solutions, and strategies that Bryon is implementing with his clients over at Spicer Wealth on a regular basis. And we're just bringing in those same conversations over here to you guys on this show. So before we bring Bryon aboard, I want to set the, kind of set the scene for you guys, our audience, as to what you can expect really on this show. Well, each episode, Bryon and I are going to be unpacking a different wealth management related topic. As you just heard, the title of our show, The Retirement Playbook. Bryon works very closely with his clients to develop unique retirement solutions catered to their specific needs. We're going to be diving into different wealth management strategies that can certainly help develop that perfect retirement plan for you. So that being said, let's go ahead and bring Bryon on and get this thing rocking and rolling. Bryon, it's great to see you. How you doing this morning?
Thanks, Ryan. It's good to be here.
Yeah, no, we've been, going through the planning process to get this show off the ground. Excited to be here with you recording our inaugural episode today. Bryon, before we get rocking and rolling into the topic that we have lined up for our audience today, I think it'd be helpful if you just gave us that high level view as to, who you are and what it is that you do over at Spicer Wealth.
Well, thanks, Ryan. I started my career back in the mid 70s as an independent insurance agent and did auto, home, life, health, group employee benefits, business insurance. And people are saying, hey, you're doing everything else for me. Why aren't you doing my investing? And that kind of fell into that's how I kind of fell into this side of it. And I remember there was an event that I had that I stopped by my dad's house one day, and he had a piece of paper on his desk. And I said, well, Dad, what's that? And he said, that's my pension options. And I said, well, I'm just curious what option you're going to select. He said, I'm going to select the life only option. And I really didn't know much about the business at the time and the degree of what that decision really meant. But I got to live through that because unfortunately, my dad retired at 62. And then at age 64, he died. And so he got $480 worth of additional money, what he didn't do was, how is that going to affect my wife, and her continuing her lifestyle? My wife and I made the decision at the time that we bought my mom a car and we paid for her rent for the next 10 years during the rest of her life. And she gave up her Social Security and just had his Social Security, and that was all she had to live on. So I got to see firsthand the effects of people making these one-time decisions. When do I start Social Security? What selection do I take on my pension? And all these things that come into play, and without proper counsel, the effect that has on the people so that kind of motivates me to do what I do. And at Spicer Wealth, we're a holistic financial planning wealth advisory practice. And what that means in English is if it touches finance, we deal with it. So we start off with like basics of income planning, making sure that the lifestyle that you want to have during your retirement years is coming from a guaranteed source of income, that it's not subject to market risk. We remember the Carter years back, when 15% interest was around, and you just don't have that anymore. You can't live on that. So we want to make sure that that's guaranteed and assured. We want to make sure that you're not paying more in taxes than you need to. We do a lot of tax reduction strategies with our clients to make sure they pay the least amount of tax possible. And legally, because I think we're all very blessed to be in the United States here, and we got to pay for those privileges, but I don't want to pay more than my fair share, and we're adamant about that. And then we look at a lot of distribution plans, and it's interesting how people, they set up a plan, but they never go back and look at it again, and things change. And so we're all over the spectrum. If it touches finance, we deal with it. We get a lot of calls. Hey, I'm thinking about this, Bryon. What do you think? And So that, but it makes it fun because I'm never doing the same thing twice in one day. So
Sure, sure. Oh, Bryon, no, that's great. I appreciate you kind of peeling back the curtain, letting our audience know what it is that you do. And it sounds like you're a man of many hats over at Spicer Wealth. But hey, Bryon, we've got a particular topic that I know we wanted to
sure.
dive in here on episode one. And I kind of want to frame it up for our audience this way because it helps to kind of sink into it a little bit. So think about this, right? Affluent families and individuals, they want to be making smart decisions about their wealth, of course. Well, it's a very important thing when you're acknowledging who you're working with as a financial professional. You want to make sure that you're working with the top financial professional, somebody who possesses a high level of financial acumen. But in today's day and age, it's just not enough. There's another piece to that puzzle, a key ingredient, a hidden element that is it's often too really overlooked. And today we're diving into what that key ingredient is that can take a good wealth manager and make them a great one. So Bryon, my first question to you today to kind of get into this and unpack this is, could you just explain for us why individuals and families with significant assets these days need to be demanding more from the financial professional that they choose to work with?
Well, the affluent in the marketplace, they really have a lot of complex needs and wants that they're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of financial advisors in the marketplace that really will fill that bill where they've got the credentials, they've got the expertise, and they focus in on product, okay? They'll create the solution. But one of the things that I find consistently with clients is that they're not getting all that they could get from that relationship because that advisor's not providing that key component, that human element side of it. Okay. And I find that they're just, they're not as successful as they could be because of that.
Got it. So you had mentioned there that human element, that really being the core of our conversation today. That
Yes.
is this missing link. So Bryon, when you say human element here, what are we talking about here? Take me through what that entails.
Well, the human element is getting to know your client more about what they're trying to accomplish. Not only what they're trying to accomplish from a number standpoint, but also what motivates them to make their financial decisions. Who are the people that are really important for them? What are the causes they believe in that they want to support? And those are all key things that bring that human element side of it into the equation. And you want to make sure that whatever plan is created for that client, that it incorporates and actually shows them a way that they can actually do and provide the things that they're trying to provide for them.
Yeah, yeah. And to build on that, I'd like to get into the why here, in your opinion, Bryon. Why is it that you believe that having that human element within wealth management as a whole is so important? I mean, think about it. We hear human element coming into different industries and, phases of life, but why do you believe it really has a place and should have a place in wealth
Well,
management?
I'll give you an example, Ryan. We've got a client that he's third generation. He's got a 200-year-old family business. And that was a very key component that he wanted to keep that legacy going. He wanted to keep it family run. Okay. He's got 4 children. His distribution plan was this: I'm going to divide everything fairly, right? Which means equal distribution. Well, his one son, with all 4 children had the right to be in the business, but three of the 4 didn't. 2 of them, the client basically said, we're either do nothing or worthless. The one, she didn't want to do anything with the business. She became a surgical nurse and was very successful in her own right. But the one son took the reins and for the last 10 years has been running this business as the president and been doing very well. Well, you look at this distribution plan, all of a sudden, the key component of what he wants to accomplish isn't going to happen because now the president, who's been running this thing very successfully for the last 10 years, all of a sudden he's got 3 parties that he's got to answer to, and 2 of them are worthless and don't have any business attributes to them. And so the business is not going to be successful and be able to accomplish that. So what we did is we restructured the assets to be able to accomplish that. The president was able to, in his part of the inheritance, make sure that he could maintain the business, and the other 3 were compensated with other assets to be able to make sure that the fairness doctrine was still in place, but yet everybody got an equal disparity, but yet the business stayed viable. And that was one key component that was not in the plan that was there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that example. You're kind of painting that picture of the human element for us because without knowing the interpersonal, attributes, as you mentioned, of each of the different heirs, you can get a little bit of a sticky situation when it comes to the livelihood of this business that has been flourishing for many years. So that's a great example there. And Bryon, we're going to be talking more on this show about this idea called a stress test. And for anybody that's
Mhm.
familiar with it, great. If not, we'll get into that, of course, in a future episode and even a little bit today. But let's talk about this idea of a stress test here for a second, Bryon. Could you talk about where the human element role might be creeping up within a stress test? Maybe even just a quick impromptu, hey, here's what a stress test is for our audience.
Well, a lot of times a stress test is just getting into understanding, first of all, what the client really wants to accomplish, what their values, what their goals are, the people that are important to them, and making sure that the plan that is before them actually incorporates all of those key elements. That's really the core of a stress test. But we find that a lot of advisors just focus on the numbers. Well, we want to do an equal distribution and boom, there we go. Well, that's fine, but let's get into the weeds a little bit more and find out how these assets are going to be affected and how the people are going to be affected by the receipt of those assets. That's an example.
I hear you loud and clear, Bryon. Well, let me ask you this then: when it comes, do you ever find that when you're doing a stress test on a given portfolio, maybe it's a current existing client of yours, maybe it's even a prospect of yours. Do you ever
Mhm.
find where a stress test actually reveals no issues and their financial plan is looking, ship shape?
Actually, Ryan, that actually is the common outcome. We find that when we actually take into consideration the human element along with the stress testing that we do, it's comforting for that client to know that everything that they're trying to accomplish is assured and guaranteed that it's going to happen the way they want it to unfold with the tools that they've got in play. And it gives them that peace of mind knowing that, hey, I'm okay. I don't need to do any changes there. That's actually the most common outcome that we find.
Yeah, yeah. The peace of mind is really what you're seeking when you seek out
Yes.
getting a stress test. It's a great thing to have when the time comes. But I'm sure, obviously, if problems or flaws in the plan arise, that you're able to address and take steps to mitigate
Yes.
those issues. So, Bryon, I can obviously see how the human element is playing a role within that stress testing process and really an overall wealth plan for anybody. Because hey, look, your goals, your aspirations for the future should be at the forefront of everything. But let's flip this for a second, Bryon. Let's think about it from the client's perspective. How do you, if you're a client, how do you assess whether or not a specific wealth manager that maybe you're thinking about working with really factors in the human element or not? What would tell you that the person in front of you is incorporating the human element?
One, I would say an easy way is the type of questions they ask. If they just focus on the numbers, what's your tax bracket, what's your earnings, what's your net worth, what all those kind of basic things that every financial advisors will ask, that's fine. But do they get into the weeds of saying, well, let's talk about the people that are important to you. Let's talk about your value system. Let's talk about your desires. And let's talk about how, the human element side of it as to what you want for your money and what legacy do you want to be known for. Those are the human element concepts that really need to be incorporated to make sure that the plan that is being undivided or designed for you is actually going to work for you.
And Bryon, a little game of hypotheticals here for you. Let's say you're an investor rather than the
Okay,
advisor that you are.
sure.
What would you want to see? Hey, if you're going into that meeting and you're talking with a financial advisor or wealth manager that you're considering working with, what would you, Bryon Spicer, want to see them, kind of practicing?
I would be listening to the types of questions they ask. I want to get a good feel that this person's trying to get to know me, get to know what drives me, gets to know who's important to me, gets to know what are the things, what are the activities that I'm involved in, and what are the events that I want to support and those kind of things. That's the kind of person that I would feel more comfortable with versus just somebody that says, hey, check the box and, what kind of investments do you have in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like that discovery process, if you will, that initial meeting is a very crucial point, when you're working with maybe a prospect or a given client at the moment. So Bryon, that discovery process, then what does your discovery process look like? What does a good discovery process truly involve, especially when we're talking about the human element perspective here?
Well, you've got to get into what are their value systems. You would look at it from values. We look at it from relationships. We look at it from, the number side of it, the tools that you have and that kind of stuff. That's small. We look at your interests and hobbies. We look at how you want to interact with your advisor. How often do you want to be communicated with, and those are all important parts of a good discovery process that needs to be unfolded in front of the client, so that you've got an understanding of what are your expectations of me and what are my expectations of you, and make sure that the relationship's set out properly right from the beginning.
Yeah, Bryon, it sounds to me it's like a systematic bit of questions that really should be, you should roll through to get to know, a client
Yes.
on that really granular level. Well, look, Bryon, a lot of good stuff here in today's conversation around this idea of the human element and obviously its important place within wealth management. As we're bringing our conversation to a head, is there any final thoughts, any other, aspects of this human element and within wealth management that you want to leave our audience with today?
Well, I would say this. It's nice to be able to have the person ask the right questions per se, but you also want to make sure that when the plan is being delivered, that those elements, they actually listened to your answers and they incorporated that into your plan versus just, it's like walking the walk and talking the talk type thing.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that truly they've listened and they get you and they help design a plan that's going to help you get to the goals that you're trying to get to.
Roger that, Bryon. And Bryon, for our audience, if anybody's out there, watching this conversation, listening on a podcasting platform, and they're liking the sound of this idea of an advisor that incorporates a wealth, a human element approach within their wealth management process, and maybe they're interested in reaching out to you and your team to open up a dialogue and talk about their specific situation, and maybe there's even a fit there. What would be the best way that somebody could reach out to you guys and start that conversation?
Well, one of the easiest ways to go to the website, which is www.spicerwealth.com. I know you've got that on the screen there, but also they can also reach out to us by just giving our office a call at 937-426-3836.
Fantastic. Well, look, Bryon, hey, you're a busy guy. You've got a company to run. We will let you get back to it, but I appreciate you carving some time out of your day to be with us here on the inaugural episode, and looking forward to jumping on board with you for the next one.
Thank you, Bryon. Appreciate it.
All righty. And hey, look, we want to take one final moment, as always, and thank you guys, our audience, for jumping aboard and being with us here on the inaugural episode of the Retirement Playbook. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we have a lot of great conversations, a lot of financial wealth management discussions planned for you guys in future episodes. So if you liked today's episode, you enjoyed any bit of it, took anything away from it, do us a favor, hit that like button. Go ahead and leave a comment on the show. Subscribe to it, of course, on whichever platform that you're checking us out on, and then of course share this information with friends, family, business owners, anybody that you think would benefit from these types of discussions and these episodes on this show. As I just mentioned, Bryon and I, we have some great discussions lined up for future episodes, and we would hate to have you guys miss out on any of that potentially beneficial information. So for Bryon Spicer, I'm Ryan Ruff. We're going to go ahead and say so long, but we appreciate you being with us here on the inaugural episode of the Retirement Playbook.